All right, it's 2:05, I think, New York time. I think we can start. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to this year's annual lecture. I'm Mücahit Bilici, Associate Professor of Sociology at John Jay College, City University of New York, and the Director of Academic Affairs at Zahra Institute. Over the years, Zahra Institute has offered scholarly retreats, mentoring for graduate students in various institutions, hosted lectures, collaborated with other universities in the region, and organized summer institutes. In 2021, the Institute launched its online Kurdish Studies certificate program, an interdisciplinary initiative. The 8-week certificate program was the first
Hocam sesiniz gitti.
Sorry, can you guys hear me, or have I been speaking in vain? Maybe I should restart.
Bir kısmı gitti hocam. Tekrar
Okay,
baştan.
yeah, thank you. So please mute your mics, participants. So, all right. So as I said, this is our annual lecture for this year, and I'm pleased to welcome you all. Zahra Institute over the years has offered various activities, scholarly retreats, mentoring for graduate students. We hosted lectures, collaborated with other universities in the region, and organized summer institutes. Last year, the Institute launched its online Kurdish Studies certificate program. This interdisciplinary initiative was an 8-week certificate program, and it was the first of its kind in the US. This English language program was designed to provide students and researchers in different fields with strategic knowledge of the structure and history of Kurdish language and the social structures and culture of the Kurdish people. So the cohort of students hailed from all over the world. Some were based in the US, from Los Angeles to New York, Florida to Chicago. Others joined us from Brazil and China, from the Basque Country, Iran, Kurdistan, and so on. Zahra Institute continues to grow as an academic institution. Soon we will be announcing our course offerings for this summer. And stay tuned for some exciting news about the next academic year. I would like to take this opportunity to thank my colleagues at Zahra Institute for their hard work in facilitating instructional and public activities like this one. Today's speaker is Fuat Dundar. Professor Dundar is a scholar of ethnicity and numbers in late Ottoman and early Republican Turkey. He has published extensively on issues of population, politics, and identity. He's the author of Modern Türkiye'nin şifresi, İttihat ve Terakki'nin etnisite mühendisliği, The Passcode to Modern Turkey, İttihat Terakki's Ethnic Engineering, 1913 to 1918, and Hicret, Dinu Devlet, Osmanlı Göç Politikası, from 1865 to 1908, his other major work, Migration, Religion, and the State, Ottoman Migration Policies. There is a connection to be made between Ziya Gokalp and Fuat Dundar beyond this lecture via sociology. The emergence of the science of sociology and the appearance of the notion of population as an object of biopolitics are intimately connected issues. Both are also inseparable from the modern idea of nation, but perhaps that's the theme for another lecture. Ziya Gokalp is a truly interesting, one might even say peculiar figure, who had a lasting impact. I leave the details of his biography to Fuat's lecture, but it is striking that the father of Turkish nationalism should be at the same time the father of Turkish sociology. His Durkheimian influence is at once collectivistic and civic, and with his Kurdish background, we see a fascinating intellectual intersection of ideas in historical context. Without further ado, I want to turn the mic over to Fuat. He will present for about 35 minutes, maybe 40 minutes, after which we will open the floor to questions from the audience. I ask that you type your questions in the chat box and direct them at Zahra Institute host, not to co-hosts, not to me, but to Zahra Institute host, and in the chat box. Depending on the volume of the questions, I'll be happy to let you ask your question in person. So we want to handle it a little bit, but also facilitate direct participation. So with that, let us start. Fuat, Keremke.
I would like to thank Prof. Mücahit Bilici and Zahra Institute for their invitation. It's an honor for me to present my ongoing project today. Mehmet Ziya is one of, if not the most important ideologist and intellectual of the transitional period from the Ottoman Empire to the Turkish Republic, which make Gökalp an important figure is not only that he was the founder of Turkish nationalism, but because of his Kurdish background. Many researchers examined his Turkish nationalism, and most of them emphasized his Kurdish ethnic origin. By the way, now I am in Diyarbakir and I visited Ziya Gokalp Museum this morning. I took this photo from the Ziya Gokalp Museum. As you see, Ziya Gokalp family. And indeed, most beliefs, for instance, will hide Martin van Brussen that Gökalp was a Kurd, and even Gökalp was a Kurdish nationalist. And he became a Turkish nationalist once he settled to Salonica. That is true that there was a change, as Hilmi Ziya Ülken argued that Gökalp brutally changed when he settled to Salonica. I think, but his change was not about his idea and his identity feelings, rather the change in his tactics and style. As in this presentation, I will demonstrate that Gökalp didn't feel or think that he was Kurdish, and also he was never a Kurdish nationalist in his life. The reason of this misperception maybe we can find in Gökalp's attitude. Namely, until Gökalp moved to Salonica, he was extremely careful. He even hid his political side from public opinion and thus his Turkish nationalism. Gökalp was known as a poet and a storyteller rather than ideologist and politician by his Kurdish circle in Diyarbakir, majoritively Kurdish nationalist. Indeed, he never used his name in his socio-political articles and poems. For instance, as you see on this slide, he used nickname in his articles, especially regarding the Kurdish question, such as Mehmet, Hüseyin, Mehdi, or anonymous, imzasız. Moreover, if one reads carefully his articles that he wrote before Salonica, Gökalp actually was Ottomanist, but with Turkish approach, Turkist approach. He defended Ottomanism for the interest of Turkism. In other words, from the Turkish interest. For instance, he wrote Turkism, Ottomanism, Türklük, Osmanlılık, an article written in 1909 as a Turkist and addressed to Turkish nationalist audience. In sum, Gökalp was Turkist who defended Ottomanism and felt as a Turk even before moving to Salonica. He openly defended Turkism in Salonica. One of other reasons, this false perception regarding Gökalp's Kurdishness or Kurdism was the letter of his uncle, Pirinçizade Fevzi Beyefendi. In this letter, Pirinçizade Feyzi Efendi published in pro-Kurdish newspaper Kürt Teavvün ve Terakki gazetesi informed that Gökalp studies on Kurdish proverbs, grammar, and dictionary. In fact, this note has been using for his Kurdishness, even his pro-Kurdish position. I think this note was published for political propaganda, namely for election. As we know, because Gökalp's opponent in Ergani district for the Ottoman parliament was Kurdish Hacı Niyazi, whose brother was the translator of Memuzin. And Gökalp needed the support of Kurdish votes. If not, Gökalp would never publish any of their Kurdology activity until 1920s. These 2 points, which be considered polemics, but I think they are very crucial in the aim to better understand Gökalp's and today's Turkish nationalism and the role of Kurdish question. As this presentation aims to demonstrate, firstly, the civic nationalism of Gökalp was not an intellectual choice, rather a product of his individual and familial interests or clash of interests. Secondly, Gökalp's Turkish studies would be better, or Turkish nationalism would be better understood via his Kurdish studies, Kurdish articles. I will now examine Gökalp's Turkism and his opinions and his position vis-à-vis Kurdish question. Gökalp's intellectual life can be divided in 4 or maybe 5 periods, even they cannot totally separated from each other. The first Gökalp, Gökalp of Diyarbekir, where he was a local intellectual and man of letters, namely poet. During this period, he conducted individual research on his ethnic identity and wrote his first article on Kurdish tribal organization. The second Gökalp can be called as a Gökalp of Salonica. He was Islamist and maybe proto-Turkist between 1910 until 1913. During this period, Gökalp did any study on Kurds. The third Gökalp can be found in Istanbul when he became Turkist, even Turanist. The context was also determined, such as Balkan Wars and the World War I. During this period, Gökalp led the empire-wide ethnographic research on Kurdish society. And finally, we can call fourth Gökalp, the Gökalp of New Diyarbakir. It was the period of the Kemalist independent movement. Gökalp started to defend Anatolian Turkism, and he extensively wrote socio-political articles on Kurdish society. I start for the first period of Gökalp life. As you know, Gökalp was born in Diyarbakir, majority Kurdish city. His father, according to Gökalp, was Turkish and Hanefi mezhep. His father was a Turkish bureaucrat, intellectual, as we call Devletlu. He was writer, statistician, publisher of official gazette and Salname Yearbook of Diyarbakir. As you see, Ziya Gokalp aile kütüğü, which can find in Ziya Gokalp Museum, his mother Züleyha Hanım came from a distinguished Kurdish family, the Pirinçizade. She was the daughter of Hacı Salih Züleyha Hanım. One side of Züleyha Hanım was from Lice. The other was, I think, Liceli A, and the other is Hazrolu, from Hazro. Gökalp's grew up in a Kurdish culture and circle, but his identity, belonging, and his Turkish thinking was strongly shaped by his father. Besides the impact of his father and his maternal family, that is Pirinçizadeler, the most important impact of Gökalp was the national and regional context when he was grown up. Gökalp was actually a prototype of 1878 Berlin Treaty generations. We can see also in Talat Pasha and Enver Pasha, because this treaty put in danger the Ottoman Balkan and Eastern Provence, including Diyarbakir. And it was a period that the modern political, also military organization were emerged in the Diyarbakir province, Tashnak, Kınçak, and Hamidian regimes. The main problem for Gökalp and for his family until 1896 was Armenian threat. Gökalp grown up in a city where the main threat was Armenian or Armenia. His uncle Arif Pirinçizade Efendi was one of 5 leaders of anti-Armenian committee, which played a role during 1895 Kınçak uprising and massacre. As you see, Gökalp's poem, which was written during this period, he was worried about Armenian issue. After finishing the military high school and preparatory school for political science, Mülki İdadisi, he left Istanbul to study in the Faculty of Veterinary. There, he joined to the illegal Young Turks movement, İttihad Osmani Cemiyeti, later to be known as a Committee Union and Program, via Kurds and Doğulu Hemşeri, countrymen circle, such as Abdullah Cevdet, İsa Skuti. The impact of Istanbul on Gökalp's intellectual life was actually much more deeper than his participation to the committee. He felt in identity crisis in Istanbul. In his article dated in 1922, Gökalp complained that the Turks of Istanbul considered him a Kurd, and for this reason, he started to research his ethnic identity. This was first step in his Kurdish studies. Later, he will extend his ethnographic research on the Kurdish and Turkish society. I will discuss this article in next slides, Millet Nedir, where he discussed his Turkish or Kurdish background. In 1901, when he returned to Diyarbakir, he found a different city than he left. It was a new Diyarbakir, where the Kurdish tribes became a main problem. The commander of the Hamidiya regime, Mili Ibrahim Pasha, was the leader of Milli tribe, had been conducting a hegemony war against the city center of Diyarbakir, Suriçi. According to Ziyaettin Fahri, who is a nationalist historian, he described that Gökalp organized a movement against the Kurdish nomads who imposed taxes on the Turkish population. With his uncle Arif Bey, Gökalp led the occupation of the post office in July 1905, and in October 1907. During this occupation, they sent several telegraphs to Istanbul, in which they argued that the most loyal population is not tribal population, but the citadel population, whose ancestry was Spahi. Asker oğlu asker. The 1908 revolution changed when the power balance to the advantage of Gökalp and his uncle. As you see, I compare Gökalp and Milli Ibrahim Pasha in other conference. We see that Gökalp was main enemy of the Milli tribe. And after the revolution, Gökalp opened a branch of CUP, Committee Union Program, in Diyarbakir, and collected 2,000 volunteers for military action against Milli Ibrahim Pasha. Gökalp celebrated his victory with Epic of Brigand Ibrahim, Şaki İbrahim Destanı, where he called the forces of Ibrahim Pasha Kürt kılıcı, Kurdish sword, and described the conflict with this tribe as a conflict of civilization, medeniyet çatışması. After the 1908 revolution, Gökalp published a journal, Peyman, in Diyarbakir. For this journal, he wrote several socio-political articles on the Kurdish tribes and Kurdish society. Gökalp argued that the Kurdish identity was preserved and survived within tribal social community, was he identified as a disease. As you see that I quoted from his article, he emphasized the Kurdish tribal problem. Gökalp's solution to solve Kurdish tribal organization in 1909, before going to Salonik, was assimilation and invitation, temsil ve isticna. He also proposed that not choosing the court judge from Kurdish local population, forcing Kurdish villagers to come to court, not employing the land owners, building schools in the Kurdish village that indoctrinate patriotic feeling and national house. As you see, Gökalp, even before moving to Salonika, he proposed the assimilation as a solution. Gökalp also proposed for the Kurdish regions as a tribal regulation that would function according to the main principle of sociology. Well, Fatma Müge Göçek Hoca knows better than me, but when we talk about Gökalp sociology, it's mainly Emily Durkheim sociology that Gökalp talked about it. As you see, the most of the article written 1909 in Peyman that about the Kurdish issue. Sorry, it's not Yeni Mecmua. I mistakenly wrote. It's in Peyman journal. Was Diyarbakir nasıl vali ister, ilmi içtima, Türklük, Osmanlılık, one of the most important article. Gökalp was elected as a member of Central Committee of CUP and settled in Salonika. It was the third Gökalp that emerged. He wrote a series of articles that shaped his Turkish nationalist approach or Turkish nationalism theory. Interestingly, he never wrote an article or report about the Kurds when he was in Salonika. After Babi Ali Putsch in 1913, through which the CUP completely took over the government, Gökalp started to shape the Kurdish policy of the government and especially the methods of their assimilation as a part of his Turkish nationalist theory. Gökalp believed that solving a social problem required research and consequence, based on Durkheim's sociology. For this reason, Gökalp initiated an ethnographic research in Anatolia in the aim to research all ethnic religious groups, especially the Kurds. Most importantly, he prepared a sociologic inquiry on the Kurdish society entitled Bir Kaza Dahilindeki İçtimai Teşkilat. This inquiry was distributed to the governors of the Kurdish region in July 1914, just before the First World War. The aim was to collect all information, documents, and other materials regarding the social situation and actual condition of Kurdish element, Kürt unsuru. In 1970, with the effort of Gökalp, a scientific commission within Aşağı ve Muhacirin Müdüriyeti Umumiyesi, the General Director of Tribes and Immigrants, was established. One of the reasons for this commission, such commission, was to research and determine the methods with scientific and radical ilmi ve esaslı metotlar for the settlement of civilization of Kurdish tribes. A book entitled The Kurds, Kürtler Tarihi ve İçtimai Tetkik, was published by this commission under the Gökalp command. and authored by a pen name Dr. Faiz. This book argued that there is no nation called Kurds, since the Kurds have no pure origin, and the Kurdish language is not distinct, and so on. When Gökalp released from Malta prison and returned to Diyarbakir, the city was under Kurdistan threat. Gökalp's article on Kurdish issue was now much more politic than ever, especially the new world order, Wilson principle, cyber security, and the Istanbul and Ankara government's Misak-ı Milli. He was elected Diyarbakir deputy to the Ankara parliament. But the main important point is his publication of Küçük Mecmua, Yeni Mecmua in Diyarbakir. As you see, I listed 4 articles published in a journal. The main aim in these articles was actually to persuade the Kurds to ally with Turks. Gökalp argued that the national pact, Misak-ı Milli, consisted not only of the Turks, but also of the Kurds. And for the common patry, the Kurds and the Turks had to be allied. In an article entitled İstimlal, giving some examples, he analyzed the term assimilation, temsil, absorb, bel, and mix, ihtilaf. He discussed how the Kurds and Turks look alike and love each other, which is why they have been easily assimilating with each other. I listed the article that examined Kurdish question, and also I added Kürtlerin Menfaati, which was published in Cumhuriyet Gazetesi. It was during the Mosul negotiation between Ankara government and British Empire. After the collapse of Ottoman Empire, Gökalp became an important advisor of the Ankara government regarding the Kurdish question. The Minister of Health and Social Service, Rıza Nur, asked Gökalp to prepare a report on the Kurdish society. The main aim of Rıza Nur was to assimilate the Kurds, or else he believed the Kurdish question would be a new Macedonia. The report, which was prepared by Gökalp, was first published in 1974 with the title Kürt aşiretleri hakkında sosyolojik tetkikler. In this report, Gökalp analyzed the social and political organization of the Kurdish tribe in Diyarbakir, Mardin, Siverek, Suruç, and Haran. In the chapter entitled Remarks, Mütealalar, the report enlisted the Turkish origin of the tribes or sub-tribes under or within the Kurdish tribes. I will now talk about one of the most, maybe the most important article of Gökalp about Kurds. It's Millet nedir? What is a nation? I just let you 1 minute to read it. I will now emphasize some points of this article. Yes, the importance of this article, that this article was written during the Wilsonian context, the time when the fate of Mosul could be determined via self-determination principle. Gökalp in this article argued that he himself proved his Turkishness scientifically. It was the moment when self-determination was discussed, and Gökalp aimed to show Diyarbakir people or Kurdish intellectual that not feeling, but science has to be taken in consideration. So, for example, a phrase that Gökalp wrote, milliyetin tayini keyfe tabi bir mesele değildir. İlmen hali lazım gelen bir meseledir. Actually, during the Wilsonian principle, the the world discussed that the ethnic identity could be determined via feelings, via votes. The second important phase is İstanbul'a ilk gittiğim zaman bu ilmi tahkikata, so I will not read all phase, but the main important point is that Gökalp felt in identity crisis not in Diyarbakir, where he felt always as a Turk, but he felt in identity crisis when he moved to Istanbul. So he started to Kurdology or Turkology to prove his Turkishness, not for the Kurds, but rather for the Istanbul Turks, maybe Anatolian Turks. The third phase is hakikati bulabilmek için bir taraftan Türklüğü, diğer cihetten Kürtlüğü tetkike başladım. So you see that he mutually researched Kurdishness and Turkishness. And he mutually defined Kurdishness and Turkishness. So recognition of Kurds and as a comparable entity with Turks. Well, according to Gökalp, in this article, nation has to determine not via self-declaration, but as a scientific truth. Gökalp found and proved his Turkish origin based on three scientific arguments. The Turkish origin of his father's county, the spoken language in Diyarbakir, and the Hanefi school of Diyarbakir city center. Actually, his father came from Çermik, which is Turkish county. So his father was Turkish, according to Gökalp. In contrast, he never talked about the identity of his father, who was a Kurd. Secondly, Gökalp argued that Diyarbakir language was not a Turkish accent dialect of Kurds, but rather a Kurdish accent of Turks. In other words, the language spoken in Diyarbakir center is the Kurdish spoken by the Turkish population. He added that the people who lived in the center of the vilayet, surrounded by the wall, Surici, speak Turkish, and hinterland people, the rural area people, speak Kurdish. Third scientific argument of Gökalp was mezhep. According to Gökalp's school of law, mezhep of the authentic population of Diyarbakir was not Shafi, rather the school of, which is Shafi, the school of law of the Kurds, but rather it was Hanefi, the school of law of the Turks. Paradox of Gökalp we can find in this article if we read carefully. Actually, at the end, he emphasized that after putting forth on his three main arguments to prove his and Diyarbakir Turkishness, he paradoxically defended another idea that identity is formed with dressing and education, terbiye. So, on the other hand, he defends scientifically, the identity have to prove scientifically, but on the other hand, he defends that identity can be shaped by terbiye. Yes, I will conclude with some conclusive remarks on Gökalp's Kurdology. Actually, I can divide in four periods his Kurdish studies. Until 1908, it was actually a self-oriented Kurdology. Gökalp tried to only find a difference between Kurds and Turks. His main methodology find the difference between these two communities. Between 1908, maybe until Salonica, maybe, he saw the Kurds as a only tribal society and as a social problem. Between 1913 and 1918, when his party was in power, he started an empire-wide research on Kurds, and at that moment, he took Kurdish society and an entity, and he tried to find the difference within Kurdish society. So his methodology also changed. Post 1918, he started to write political articles on the Kurdish society, and his methodology was to find similarity between the Kurds and Turks. So as you compare, when until 1908, mainly he tried to find difference, and post 1918, he tried to find the similarity between these communities. Other remarks that I would like to emphasize is Gökalp always recognized the Kurds and Kurdish language, but Kurds as a kavim, but never as a nation. And his Kurdology started not with academic interests, rather with individual crises and interests shaped by familiar conflict of interests and nourished by Kurdish or countrymen webs. The other interesting point, he defended that sociology for society, that is the transformation of Turkish society and the Turkish state, he emphasized, ethnography for primitive society or the primitive characters of society, that is the Kurdish tribal organization, if not for the Kurdish society. I quoted from his articles. He said that toplumun heykel şekillerini aradığımız zaman bu konuda bize yol gösterecek olan etnografi ilmidir. Aşiretleri araştırmak için ne sosyoloji ne de istatistik gerekli. So his disciplinary scientific approach also changed according to ethnicity. The last remarks that, as I emphasized, he simultaneously researched Kurds and Turks. However, Gökalp's Kurdology was not for Kurds, rather for Turks or Turkism or for the nation state. He always also, one of his methodology was antagonist classification, but not anti or hostile classification. He never put Kurds and Turks as a hostile. Urban Turks, rural Kurds, civilized Turks or ignorant Kurds, individual Turks versus tribal Kurds. Gökalp's hierarchy, basing on Durkheim's social evolution model, was Western civilization to Turkish culture, Hars to Kurdish tribalism. In other words, a world, state, city, and village. So he placed the Kurds and Turks chronologically, but not spatially as hostile. Well, I think I will stop here, and I think I didn't pass the time. What do you think, Mujahid?
Fuat, you did excellent job in time-wise. Thank you very much for this fascinating presentation. It was a talk that went against common wisdom about Ziya Gokalp. You brought forth nuances in his thinking and changes, transformations over time. I want to make a few quick points. One is the relational character of his identity, whether it is Turkishness or Kurdishness. That this is something from a Kurdish perspective, something very typical, I would say. Back home in Kurdish lands, people can be something they wouldn't be specifically Kurdish, and it's dialogically in Istanbul, encounter with Turkish public, Turkish center, that they discover their Kurdishness, or their Kurdishness becomes an issue for them. You see this very clearly inside Nursi, whose name was Bediüzzaman initially, and he was famous mullah, doing a great job as a judge and scholar. But when he goes to Istanbul, similar trajectory, he becomes Saidi Kurdi. He feels that tension, so he's kind of defensive. He's saying, hey, you can pose any question, but I ask no question. And so he's trying to establish his precarious Kurdishness in that intellectually hostile environment. So that's very interesting, the evolution of things. And we can see how Ziya Gokalp kind of moved from Kurdish Turkish Muslim names like Mehmed and such thing, Mohammed, gradually towards Gökalp, and the things that are distinctively Turkish. And another interesting point has to do with his conception of nation, because he has both kind of constructionist and positivistic elements, and this is very Durkheimian paradox. It reflects the moment, the era in which positivism is the authority of science in social sciences is naturalistic, almost, hence positivism. We have that in Durkheim, but at the same time, it has a civic character, and that's too in Durkheim very clearly visible, especially those of us sociologists, we can see that. So when he conceptualizes nation, therefore he's torn between two things. He recognizes its voluntaristic character, the social contractual nature of nation as a modern collectivity, and at the same time he doesn't want to leave it to people's choices, will, which can go in the wrong directions, obviously. So you want to rely on scientific totalitarianism, so to say, to keep things together, nation project. And so it is absolutely fascinating how he changed over time from his Diyarbakir, Salonica, Istanbul, back to Diyarbakir moments, each reflecting the moment, the tensions, the motivations of the person and the environment. So thank you very much. Excellent. I want to open the floor to questions. I think
Müjahit, I would like to emphasize just one point.
Please go ahead.
Actually, because of the limited time, I couldn't go in details, but maybe in my next book, a biography of nationalism, I will examine. Actually, Gökalp was not that very homogeneous that maybe I present here. For instance, when he wrote for the Turks or for the Anatolian Turks, he tried to demonstrate his Turkishness scientifically also. But when he turned to the Kurds, it was also education, terbiye, which determined the identity. Mm-hmm. So he was always a borderland the personality, and his we have to also examine where and which context he wrote his articles.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. I think we can proceed by you can raise your hands and I'll be happy to let you speak. Unless you haven't already typed your question. If you did, I can get it from there as well. Any questions or comments? Maybe to warm up the flow, let me ask a question. His mentor was Abdullah Cevdet, right? Dr. Abdullah Cevdet.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about their relationship?
Actually, I really tried to use his writings or the Ottoman Turkish archives, if not Kurdish memories. The memory of Kurdish figures is present a different Gökalp. Mm-hmm. So it's a bit difficult to find who is Gökalp. And I also here I don't follow the scientific methodology. Just I chose my methodology. So using only Gökalp's writings. If not, according to Kurdish memories, that he really Abdullah Cevdet even told that Gökalp shocked me when he became Turkish nationalist, but actually I found the article written 1908, 1909. He was already Turkish, or he was already
nothing to be
pluralist.
shocked there. So
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe Gökalp was very political character, so he tried to cover himself in Diyarbakir from his Kurdish nationalist circle, and he tried to show another Gökalp to his society. So we know that Gökalp was very pragmatic guy. Most probably that he know another Gökalp. So, but when you look at his poem, even before Salonica, he was really Turanist, but he knew very well that the idea of Ottomanism could solve the fall of the empire.
thank you, Fuat. We are honored to have Professor Fatma Müge Göçek, and then Metin İlan will be next after Müge Göçek.
Thank you, Fuat. This was a wonderful presentation, very nuanced and very historical.
Hammer for me if you like it.
Yes, it's wonderful. I think what is important also is to think about the larger context within which this was occurring. I think, I mean, what I have heard at least is that you see how nationalism emerges during the transition from empire to nation state. So that if you put it later, I think what happens, at least in the case of Turkish nationalism, that it becomes hegemonic and exclusive, I think in the 1930s. At least this is the time when culture that is sort of, if you have the Turkish culture, you define nation also through their culture, through how they make meaning. And of course, when you think about this transition, you can see it, I think, the emphasis at least on culture, and that is one sort of dimension. I have three comments. The second one has to do with patriarchy. Obviously, the fact that he defined himself as a Turk first is because he has a Turkish father, which makes sense, because both in the Islamic context and the patriarchal context, which of course intersect, you always have the father sort of, the lineage is determined through the father, and that is why I think he never thought of himself as a Turk, as a Kurd, sorry. And the third thing is that my colleague here, George Steinmetz, is doing some work on early sociologists. I mean, and this is also early, obviously. And when you look at sort of Durkheim especially, and how sociologists were first working in the field, it turns out that many of them actually sort of normalize and naturalize whatever nationalism is there, and they therefore work for states, for emerging nation states, where they are not revolutionary like sociology later becomes, but rather for conservatives reproducing the status quo. I mean, so there is a very conservative trend within nationalism too, and I think that is where I would place Gökalp, and you can get in touch with me if you want, and I'll give you more references. But thank you, I mean, global references. But thank you for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you, Müge Hocam. Great input, food for thought. Fuat, would you like to say something, or should we get more questions?
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think it's frozen. I took all your comments. I will use them. Actually, for your first comment, I forgot. I would like to emphasize a point. Could you please remind me your first point? I can't hear.
1 second, we need to let's see.
Or maybe you can also remind me. I really.
Okay, we go to.
Oh, sorry. I said from empire to nation state.
Yes, exactly.
It
Exactly.
becomes the identity
Exactly.
also transforms from an
Yes,
imperial to a national identity, and tribal
exactly.
identity. Then he sees the Turkish one as tribal identity that is sort of under national identity of the Turkish
It's
national identity.
very important point, dear Müge, because I wish Gökalp lived or survived during the Sheikh Said rebellion, because just after his death, the power or milice of Sheikh Said arrived at Diyarbakir won. But I read his relative article, her cousin or brother article in Diyarbakir Mecmua. He was really anti-Kurds and anti-Sheikh Said or anti-Kurdish tribes. So maybe if Gökalp survived during the Sheikh Said rebellion, maybe he could start to be excluded the Kurds or ignore the Kurds or reject the Kurdish identity. But he was that before just Sheikh Said. I would like to examine maybe his cousin or his brother, how we can evaluate the opinion of his family. I will now I am in struggle. Maybe I will ask you when I finish what could be Gökalp's opinion after Sheikh Said rebellion vis-a-vis the Kurds.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Next is Metin İlhan, then Sabri Ateş the question. Go ahead, Metin İlhan. Let me see.
I can't hear.
Ask to unmute, I guess. Sorry, I'm having a little technical.
Mikrofonunu açması gerekiyor.
Yeah, Metin, go ahead. Okay, I think we can move on to our next question, and that's Sabri Ateş. Would you like to, speak, or do you want me to read the question, Professor Ateş?
Just reading is fine.
Okay, so the question is that do we know if any Kurds confront
Gökalp, I guess.
Gökalp at the time, and if so, what was his response to them, right? So.
Well, there was too many Kurds who wrote about Gökalps, but really I prefer to use Gökalp's writing himself, since he believes only the science, and I try to take in consideration his beliefs. Yes, for example, according to Hanili, I forgot his name, Hanili, just wait, Halil Hayali or Ahmet Cemil Asena or Ishak Sukuti, we can read his memory about Gökalp. For example, Halil Hayali, even he argued that he gave too many Kurdology documents to Ziya Gokalp, hoping that Gökalp will publish them. But when he asked to Gökalp to return back his documents, Gökalp rejected, and we don't know where he put these Kurdology documents that he took from Halil Hayali or other Kurdish figures.
It's an interesting question, I think, in terms of whether the fact that Ziya Gokalp didn't engage Kurds or such challenges is also interesting.
Was there a dialogue between them?
Yeah, yeah.
Or he just dismissed them and say, Kurd.
Yeah, actually, we can observe. Actually, there was a monodialogue or monologue from Gökalp's articles. For example, in 1909, he cited from Şerefname. It's important when the Kurdish nationalists start to talk about Kurdish resources or Kurdology materials. The second, we have not to forget that if Gökalp emphasized strongly Kurdish tribes or tribal question, this was also discussed by other Kurdish intellectuals during this period. So in Kurdistan Gazetesi, the Kurds also discussed Kurdish tribes, but he discussed for the Armenian question, but Gökalp discussed Kurdish tribes for the Turkishness. But I mean, Gökalp, without emphasizing the other Kurdish intellectual, but actually his article was also a kind of answer for this Kurdish public opinion discussion that I will examine in my one of my next articles.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fuat. Metin İlhan,
and
if you
also,
are ready,
for example, he also talked about Ahmedi Hani, and he talked also about some Kurdish figures, historical figures, and we know that other Kurdish newspapers discussed about these topics.
Okay. Metin İlhan, let's try one more time.
Maybe until he asked his question, I can add also. I have a feeling that Gökalp actually didn't take seriously in consideration his Kurdish circle or Kurdish nationalists. He was very careful about the Turks or Anatolian Turks. As you see also in his letters sent from Malta prison to a Turkish professor in Istanbul, he also tried to show that the Turkishness of Diyarbakir. So just I understood that he, in every time, he tried to demonstrate that, so he's Turkish, as Diyarbakir also was a Turkish city to the Turkish intellectual. I give another example. When Gökalp was very, how can I say, angry, do you know the pitch poem he wrote? Because against a Turkish intellectual. Because a Turkish intellectual in Istanbul claimed that Gökalp is Kurd. And so Gökalp wrote a long poem and very angry. He answered very angry. But when the Kurdish intellectual called him, I read in a memory, just Gökalp smiled them. So do you understand? So for Gökalp, the Kurdish intellectual, he didn't take either in consideration, or maybe, I don't know, maybe he was very, very oriented to the Western region or Europe or Anatolian region. Maybe he minimized the Kurdish intellectuals, I don't know.
Yeah, it will be interesting if Kurds were not tribal, would Ziya Gokalp consider them as more worthy of the category of a nation rather than a simple kavim? Because, being tribal was a problem for him, and this elite membership, being, educated class and all that, also probably shaped his, at least psychologically, his sense of belonging and so on. Fascinating.
Yes, one of his memory or published by his brother in 1930s, 40s, because as you know, there was a journal, Gökalp, and I read the memory of his brothers. According to his brother, Gökalp was very angry about the division between Kurdish family in Diyarbakir. So you see, even the Gökalp was tried to unify the Kurdish family in Diyarbakir without calling them Kurdish family, but he was even not tribal division, even familial struggle in Diyarbakir, because he couldn't finish his speech in a Cemiyet because two Kurdish family discussed it.
He liked civility, he wanted civilization. Serdar Şengül is the next person to ask question. Go ahead, Serdar.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for the presentation. And I have a question. The methodology Ziya Gokalp adopted while analyzing the Kurdish tribes reminds me of the methodology adopted by Evans Pritchard in African political system. When in 1936, when they analyzed the African political system, they isolated the African continent and each African tribe from the larger colonial context, and without analyzing the colonial experience and colonial impact on the social fabric and the political formation of the African continent, they analyzes the under the influence of social functionalism as an independent, isolated unit. And I think it reminds me of this, and Ziya Gokalp, I think, of course, he was inspired by Turkmenian sociology, but in a way, maybe he was under the influence, under such kind of colonial psyche, colonial intellectual psyche. So I have my first question is whether Ziya Gokalp, in any part of his study, analyzed the Ottoman colonial expansion towards Kurdistan and its effects on Kurdistan region, Kurdistan society. And this is my first question, because it is there are many ways of framing the Ottoman transformation in the 19th century. In a way, we can analyze it, frame it as a transformation of an empire into a nation state, or colonial expansion of an empire on a new land as a colony and as a separate colonialism in Kurdistan, which I mean. So is it possible to analyze without considering this colonial context and tribal Kurdish tribes? This is just making reference to Ziya Gokalp's analysis. This is my first question. And my second question is that
if you allow me to respond to the first question, because it's already important, and I will forget. As a historian, I have a very, very short memory. I can forget in 10 seconds. So
no, please go on.
I am historian. Maybe my engineer character works in that occasion. Well, it's a very good question. Whether there was a division between Durkheim impact or the impact of his Devletlu father or Devletlu position. That's true that Gökalp, despite he was imprisoned in Istanbul and he deported to his natal state Diyarbakir, he also could find job in official institute. So you see how in one side he was maybe very independent, but on the other side he could easily find a job in state service. So it was in between Devletlu or sometimes of opposition. That's true that his character of the Devletlu was important. In his some articles written in 1922, when he started to find a similarity between these two societies, that's true that there he examined not strongly Ottoman colonial the heritage, but he examined the Kurds. he examined the relationship between Kurds and Turks since Ottoman Empire or Selçukid, that the Kurds and the Turks mutually assimilate to each other. The city center speak Turkish, without emphasizing that they were Turcophile or Turcophonized, but he clearly think that all Eastern or Kurdistan provinces city center is Turkish speaking, but all rural populations speak Kurdish. And he argued that because this society mutually love each other and assimilate each other. And he emphasized, and he gave another example to support that, this argument that he examined the relation between Turks and Arabs. He argued that Turks could not, or with Arabs could not be mutually assimilated each other because these two communities was very distinguished to each other. And I don't know if it is the answer to your question, but I will also read again some articles via your questions. Thank you very much.
Before you ask second question, sorry, one thing about colonial context being totally neglected, and also in terms of relying on so-called study of primitive society, ethnography of primitive societies, especially Durkheim, it was really not direct research. It was relying on, ethnographers, anthropologists, ethnologists, people who were in some sense part of the whole colonial project for European modernity at the time. So, Ziya Gokalp is a second-hand person, and maybe he's even more original because he was a native person who could say something credible about the Kurdish tribes and so on. But early sociology relied on second-hand information about so-called primitive societies, native cultures. Okay, Serdar, let's ask your next question. Then İpek Demir is next. Go ahead.
Yeah. And the second question is related with the first one. Do you think is there any achievement in Turkish sociology towards the Kurdish society since the Gökalp's time, when you consider the recent and this discussion debates among the Turkish Marxists in 60s and 70s and the current renovated Turkish sociology towards Kurdish society and tribes? Do you believe that? Is there any achievement in Turkish sociology, or they're still at the level of Ziya Gokalp sociology? Thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you for this really very important and valuable question, and which I cannot easily answer. Actually, I would like to say something that I already found, because I cannot directly answer your question. I checked or examined some ethnographic articles which use the Ziya Gokalp's ethnographic articles regarding Kurdish issue. I found any Turkish ethnographers, Turkish sociologists, or Turkish anthropologists used Ziya Gokalp's articles on Kurds. I don't know the sociologists, but for ethnographer and for anthropologue in Turkey, they really ignored Gökalp's articles. Probably because Gökalp's nationalism was inclusive vis-a-vis Kurds, and he never rejected Kurdish identity or Kurdish language. But for the sociologue, it's difficult to say something for me, but for anthropologists and for ethnologue, yes, he ignored, even maybe he consciously didn't emphasize Gökalp's articles. So in that occasion, the impact of Gökalp on Turkish ethnographer and the anthropologue maybe was very limited.
Thank you, Fuat. İpek Demir, Professor Demir, go ahead, please.
Hello, thank you very much for your talk. I'm İpek Demir, I'm based in Leeds, the UK. So I was just wondering if you can say a little bit about the influence of social Darwinism on Gökalp's work and his outlook on nations and nationalism in general, or maybe underpinning his sociology in general, but also on Kurds in particular. So social Darwinism is in terms of the context of those times. I'm also interested in his relationship with the Committee of Union and Progress, İttihat, whom we know were charmed and influenced by social Darwinism, for example. So perhaps you've answered that, or you might have touched on it. Sorry, my line kept dropping, but I thought I'd just ask these questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's maybe the hardest question. By time, the question become much more harder than. Well, it's very difficult for me to find a social Darwinism in Gökalp's writing vis-a-vis the Kurds. Gökalp really didn't consider Kurds as an enemy, or but rather a society could be, as I emphasize in this. Can you see my screen? I don't know.
No, we see you, so you can read it to us if you will.
Yes, actually, for Gökalp, the Kurds and Turks was not spatially enemy each other, but chronologically follow each other. So the Kurds was in bad time, so the chronological was back, but not enemy of Turks. It's why he emphasized kan kardeşliği with Turks, but can kardeşliği with Kurds. So he can kardeşliği versus kan kardeşliği. He clearly know that Kurds were different, but really very, very close to each other. The other point that it's difficult for me to find his social Darwinist connotation, because very interestingly, or maybe paradoxically, he ignored Armenian question. He almost never wrote about the Armenian issue. I really, when I was doing my PhD on the Armenian issue, I read several times where he speaks about Armenians, but interestingly, when he speaks positively. So the Armenian tüccar, Armenian sanatkar, something like this. Most probably, Gökalp knew his frame, his power, his limits. Most probably, he tried to ignore Armenian because Armenian was already civilized for him. Even I found, as you know, 2 months ago, or 3 months ago, Tarih Vakfı published a Kızıl Konak arşivleri. You have to read this book who published a secret meeting of Committee Union program, where Ziya Gokalp told that proposed assimilation of Kurds and separation with Arabs and Armenian issue. He also never talked negatively about Armenians, but he proposed that Armenians who already deported to Zor Desert cannot be returned to Anatolia. Maybe they can be stayed there. So I don't know.
Okay, before I hand over the mic to Cengiz Özcan, let me say one thing about Durkheim's kind of nationalism is civic, and you don't see much elements of racism, although he falls into this kind of myth-making process in being a poet. So he's involved in that, but the Kurds are simply underdeveloped, and their civilization, Turkism or Turkishness, is presented, that's my understanding, as a kind of civil religion for Kurds, so that in the new republic, new nation, they they participate in this civility by becoming Turkish. And it's a kind of benignly conceived assimilation project for the sake of a nation formation. All right, Cengiz Özcan, go ahead.
Thank you. Let me to ask a question. So, is there any criticism from Said Nursi about Ziya Gokalp?
It is the question have to answer by Mücahit, not by.
Actually, yes, you're right.
Yeah, it's a little tough question. There is something attributed to Said Nursi that, Ziya Gokalp introduced into Turkish imagination this notion of kızıl elma, red apple, not to be confused with big apple. So red apple, now it's name of a unmanned fighter jet in Turkish military industrial complex. So if you haven't heard of it, you will soon hear about it, I think. Anyway, so kızıl elma it became like a symbol of nationalism, and then even today it survives in Turkish popular culture, if you're familiar with it. Now, supposedly Said Nursi has said that I wouldn't exchange an onion. Onion here represents Kurdishness, primitiveness associated with tribal and kind of organic Kurdishness, with a red apple. So the onion versus red apple represents two kind of identities or conceptions of Kurdishness. Apart from that, Said Nursi, of course, was critical of an exclusionary nation project. But I think at the basis, this is my rather than transferring you what is commonly said about Said Nursi, I think at the bottom, Said Nursi also believed in some civil project, a kind of a Republican coexistence between Kurds and Turks. He was, but he thought it not in Turkism, but in Muslimness, initially in Muslimness, gradually he even, with secularization of state, that became less available to him. I guess that's a partial response to the question, but it's an interesting question to pursue. Maybe Fuat and I, we will do a joint project on this. What do you say? Yeah.
We with Mücahit thought that we will publish a common book about two persons, Gökalp and Said Nursi.
It will be interesting, so hopefully.
Okay.
Yeah, inshallah. All right, Esma Güneş has a question, and maybe I should conclude afterwards. Go ahead, Esma.
Hocam Türkçe sorsam sıkıntı olur mu sizin?
Yeah, feel comfortable. Türkçe
Öncelikle
sorabilirsin.
Tamam. Öncelikle sizin konunuzdan devam etmek için o soruyu önceliyorum. Bir Said Nursi'de geçiyor ya, dil ve din bir ise millet birdir demiş bir unsuriyetperverci, menfi milliyetçi reislerden biri diyor. Burada Ziya Gökalp'i mi kastediyor acaba? Hani hem milliyetçilerin reisidir diyor, hem de böyle demeye mecbur olmuştur diyor. Dil ve din bir ise millet birdir. Burada civic nationalizmi aslında mecbur olduğunu söylüyor. Bu aklıma geldi. Fuat Hoca'ya da ben hayatımda çok beni sarsmıştı onun kitabı. Yani etkili bir isim kendisi. O yüzden teşekkür ediyorum. 2015'te kitabını okumuştum. Modern Türkiye'nin Şifresi kitabını. Orada aklımda kalan bir yer vardı. Şu an çok üzerinden geçti ama Talat Paşa'nın çizdiği haritanın bugünkü Türkiye sınırlarına tekabül ettiğini söylüyordunuz hocam. Şimdi bu Talat Paşa'nın defterinden mi alıntı? Çünkü çok fazla tarihi kaynak vardı orada, şifreli telgraflar falan filan. Ben tarihçi olmadığım için çok takip edemedim. Bu Talat Paşa'nın o defteri,
evet, defteri
ne
tam,
ölçüde? Ne ölçüde?
Ben tam tezimi
hocam.
Tam tezimi bitirirken Talat Paşa'nın defteri yayınlanmıştı.
Evet. Peki bu Murat Bardakçı'nın yayınladığı defter.
Evet. Öncelikle
yani
gazetede yayınlandı zaten.
Evet, bunu kaynak olarak alabiliriz değil mi?
Tabii,
Yani-
tabii. O Talat
Tamam.
Paşa'nın defteridir, orijinaldir.
Yani şu an çünkü Türkiye'de şöyle bir gidişat var da tamamen İttihatçılarla Türkiye'nin o bağını koparmaya, Türk ulus inşasının bağını koparmaya yönelik yeni bir trend var. Yani sizin o kitabınızın yazıldığı dönemde öyle değildi. Ama şu an değişiyor, yani üniversitelerde de bu değişiyor. Post Kemalizm tartışmaları da buna dahil. Yani o yüzden bu tür kaynakları belki bizim daha çok sahip çıkmamız gerekiyor. O yüzden öğrenmek istedim. Teşekkür ederim.
Çok teşekkür ediyoruz Esma katkıların için ve soru için. Zannediyorum şey yapabiliriz artık, toparlayabiliriz. Fuat, son bir kez eklemek istediğin bir husus ve söylemek istediğin bir şey varsa.
Yok yani gerçekten tekrar teşekkür ederim. Bu sayede Fatma Hoca'yı da gördüm, diğer arkadaşları da gördüm. Çok sevindim. Böyle benzeri fırsatlar için de başka konuşmalarda da bir araya gelmek isterim.
I forgot we switched back to Turkish. So, all right. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. And I would like to thank Fuat for this wonderful lecture. There is a lot to digest. And I want to thank you all for your questions, participation. And we'll see you later in other activities. Until then, stay safe and take care. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fuat.